My husband and my mother ran away, taking advantage of my business trip, thinking I would never find out, but I showed up at their new house with divorce papers. I always thought that if I ever suffered a betrayal, I would see it coming, that I would notice the signs, that my intuition would alert me, that something inside me would scream that something was not right. I considered myself an intelligent, perceptive person, someone who could read between the lines. But the reality is that you are never truly prepared for a stab in the back, much less when it comes from the people who should protect you. My life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. I'm 32 years old, have a good job that allows me to live comfortably, and until recently I believed I had a solid marriage. My husband, David, and I had been together for 6 years. We weren't the ideal couple, but we had built something together. We shared a house, future plans, and most importantly, or so I thought, trust. My relationship with my mother, on the other hand, was always complicated. I grew up with a woman who never saw me as her daughter, but as an extension of herself. If something good happened to me, she found a way to minimize it. If something bad happened, it was somehow my fault. I never felt her unconditional support, but over the years I learned to accept it and to put distance between us. Despite this, I never imagined she would be capable of doing what she did. It all started a couple of weeks ago when I had to travel for work. It wasn't anything new. My job requires me to travel from time to time, and David knew it perfectly well. Not only that, but he encouraged me to go. He assured me that he would take care of everything at home, and that I didn't have to worry. Even the day I left, he hugged me, kissed me, and told me that he would miss me during my trip. Everything seemed normal. We talked every day, exchanged messages. He even sent me pictures of the house to show me how things were going. He told me that everything was calm, that I should concentrate on my work, and not worry about anything. I naively believed him. When I returned after 10 days away, I was tired but excited to come home. I remember the taxi dropped me off at the entrance, and the first thing I noticed was that the living room curtain was gone. At that moment, I didn't think much of it. Maybe David had decided to wash it or change it. But as soon as I put the key in the lock and opened the door, my whole body froze. The house was empty. It wasn't that some things were missing. It wasn't a mess or signs of a robbery. No, the house was completely empty. There was no furniture, no paintings, no clothes, absolutely nothing. I dropped my suitcase at the entrance and walked like a ghost through each room, hoping to find an explanation. The empty closet, the empty kitchen, the empty bathroom, my empty office, my documents, my computer, even the little things that gave life to my home. Everything had disappeared. My brain couldn't process it. I called David, hands shaking, straight to voicemail. I called again, nothing. I sent messages, no response. Anxiety began to settle in my chest like an unbearable pressure. I tried to convince myself that there must be a rational explanation. Maybe something happened, maybe there was an emergency, maybe. But then I opened the bank app. Our joint account was practically empty. Almost 80% of our savings had disappeared in a series of bank transfers made while I was away. My heart stopped for a moment. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My first instinct was to call my mother. I don't know why. Maybe deep down I still wanted to believe that she could give me an answer, that somehow this wasn't what it seemed. But when I dialed her number, she didn't answer either. And then just when I was on the verge of collapse, my cell phone vibrated with a message from my sister. "Are you okay?" The message surprised me. My sister and I didn't talk much unless it was something important. Something in my stomach shrank. I replied, "Why wouldn't I be okay?" A few minutes passed before she answered. I felt the tension in every second that passed. Finally, her answer came and changed everything. I saw Mom and David together in another city. They moved into a new house. The world stopped spinning. I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. My brain simply refused to accept what I was reading. "How? Together?" I wrote. "Together as a couple," she replied. I felt the blood drain from my body. I stared at the phone screen as if I had misread, as if somehow I could change what was in front of my eyes. My sister continued writing. She told me that she had seen them in a city 2 hours away from here, entering a house together with boxes, laughing as if all this was normal, as if they hadn't destroyed my life. I don't know how long I spent sitting on the floor of my empty house, breathing raggedly, phone still in hand. I felt like a part of me had shut down, like my brain didn't know how to react. But when the shock began to dissipate, When reality set in with all its harshness, something inside me changed. David and my mother had planned this. They had waited for me to leave. They had emptied my house, my bank account, my life. And now they were living together as if nothing had happened. They thought they could do this to me and that I would simply stand by, that I would cry and break down in silence while they enjoyed their new life together. But what they didn't know was that I'm not the kind of person who stands by and watches as they're destroyed without doing anything. If they thought this would end here, they were very wrong. And I'm not going to stop until I see them fall. Update 1. 3 weeks have passed since the day I returned and found my house empty. Since then, my life has felt like a roller coaster of emotions, ranging from the deepest anger to the coldest determination I've ever felt in my life. At first, I spent days in a state of absolute shock. I had trouble sleeping, eating, even thinking clearly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of the empty house, the looted bank account, my sister's message confirming what seemed like a cruel joke of fate. I wondered how I could have been so naive, how I didn't see the signs, how I trusted so much in the two people who could hurt me the most. But when the shock dissipated, fury took its place. I wasn't going to be left crying. I wasn't going to wait for karma to do its job. I was going to do it myself. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best one I could find in divorce and fraud cases. Because yes, this was no longer just infidelity. David had committed fraud by emptying our joint account without my consent. Legally, the money in that account was as much mine as his, and by taking it all without notice, he had left a perfect trail for my lawyer to destroy him. Within a few days, we managed to freeze the bank account. I couldn't recover all the money, but I did recover a part, and more importantly, I blocked any attempt by David to access the remaining funds. If he thought he was going to use my money to finance his new life with my mother, he was very wrong. After that, I checked the security cameras I had at home. Most people don't know this, but I had cameras installed at the entrance and in some rooms mainly for security. What I found in the videos was devastating. The night before my return, David and my mother walked around the house as if it were theirs, packing my things with a calmness that made my stomach churn. They not only took furniture and valuables but also personal things. Photographs, letters, memories that had meaning to me. They took them without a second thought, as if it had never mattered, as if I had never mattered. Watching those videos was the final push I needed. I stopped crying. I stopped lamenting. From that moment on, there was only one thing on my mind: destroying them. A week after discovering all this, I got a key piece of information. The house they were living in was not in either of their names. In my state of absolute rage, the first thing I did was hire a private investigator. I wasn't going to leave any loose ends. It didn't take long for him to give me the information I needed. The house where they lived had been rented with my credit. Yes, David had used my information to process the lease. I stared at the report for several minutes, processing what it meant. My mother and he had not only betrayed me, but they were still using my name to sustain their disgusting life together. They wanted to live as if I had never existed. Perfect. I was going to make sure they had nowhere to live either. I contacted the owner of the house immediately and explained the situation. I showed him proof that I had not authorized that contract and that the fraud was in the process of being investigated. As soon as he saw the legal documents, his attitude changed. He didn't want any trouble. The result? My mother and David received an eviction notice with a 30-day deadline. When I found out, I felt a satisfaction I can't describe. There is no worse feeling than losing the security of a home, and that was exactly what they had done to me. Now it was their turn to feel it. The next thing on my list was to make sure that neither of them had access to any more money, and for that, I needed to cut off all possible avenues. First, I canceled all the credit cards where David appeared as an additional user. I left him without access to my accounts and alerted the banks about possible fraud attempts. Then I made sure. My uncle owns the company where David had a pretty comfortable position thanks to me. When I married him, I helped him get that job. I thought I was supporting him, that I was betting on our future together. How stupid I was. I called my uncle and told him everything. I sent him proof. I told him that if he wanted to keep a traitor working for him, it was his decision, but I wasn't going to stay silent. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. That same afternoon, David received an email with his termination letter. In a matter of weeks, David had gone from having financial stability to being homeless and jobless. And the best part? This was just the beginning. I found out from my sister that when David received the eviction notice, his first reaction was to try to convince my mother to use her money to rent another place. What he didn't know was that my mother didn't have any money. For years, my mother had lived off my deceased father's money, and what I gave her when I was still trying to maintain a relationship with her. She would brag about being independent, but the truth was that she had no idea how to manage without someone to support her. Update 2. 2 months have passed since I discovered the truth and put my revenge into motion. What began as a heartbreaking pain has now transformed into a dangerous calm. David and my mother asked for it. They thought they could rob me, humiliate me, and simply move on with their lives as if nothing had happened, that I would stay in a corner, shattered and broken, while they enjoyed their new life together. But the reality is very different. Since the last update, many things have happened. Every day that passes, my plan unfolds exactly as I imagined it. Every piece I move brings them a little closer to absolute collapse. And the best part is that they themselves are accelerating their downfall. As I mentioned before, I managed to have the house where they were living taken off their lease since they had done it using my credit without my authorization. When the landlord gave them the eviction notice, David and my mother initially thought they could ignore it. I'm sure they believed they could find a quick fix and move on with their lives, but they didn't count on the fact that I had covered all the angles. When the deadline to vacate arrived, they still had nowhere to go. My sister told me that David was hysterical trying to borrow money from friends, but his reputation was already starting to deteriorate. The people who knew him had found out what he had done. Nobody wants to lend money to a guy who abandoned his wife to run away with his mother-in-law. My mother, on the other hand, did what she does best, try to manipulate. First, she tried to contact me again. She sent me an email saying that we all make mistakes and that we should sit down and talk like a family. I ignored it. Then she tried to get involved in my sister's life. She showed up at her house unannounced, crying and saying that I had left her homeless, that she needed help. My sister slammed the door in her face. When they officially became homeless, they tried to look for an apartment to rent, but this is where my next blow took effect. I had placed an alert in the credit system in David's name, indicating that he was under investigation for fraud. This meant that any rental attempt in his name would be automatically rejected. Result: no landlord wanted to risk renting to them. The last reports I have indicate that they ended up in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. From a comfortable house with luxurious furniture, stability, and money to a seedy motel room where they charge by the hour. If there's something that David and my mother valued more than anything, it was their reputation. My mother has always cared about what others think of her. She likes to feel superior, to be seen as someone successful and respected. And David, well, he's always been a guy who depends on appearances. In his mind, he was still the hardworking and reliable husband who had a stable life and an enviable marriage, until I took care of ruining that image. You see, I wasn't the only one hurt by their betrayal. Many people who knew us, family, friends, co-workers, were shocked to learn what they had done. But so far, everything had been kept private. That changed when I decided it was time to expose them. It all started with a video. I received an anonymous message from someone who had been close to them in recent months. In the video, my mother and David were in what appeared to be a hotel reception arguing. Not just any fight. My mother was yelling at David that he was a good-for-nothing, that he had no money, that it had been a mistake to leave me because at least with me he had stability. David, on the other hand, was trying to calm her down, but he was clearly losing control. He looked worn out with messy hair, cheap clothes, and unshaven. It was obvious that their new life together was far from what they had imagined. So what did I do with that video? Exactly. I leaked it. I posted it on a local gossip forum under an anonymous profile. Within days, the video went viral in our social circle. Suddenly, everyone was talking about them. People in the comments couldn't believe it. They couldn't understand how a mother had done something like that to her daughter. They couldn't believe that a man would have stooped to that level for money. My mother went from being seen as a refined and respected woman to a traitor without dignity. David went from being a stable husband to a kept parasite who ruined his own life for a cheap whim. The height of it all came when his own family saw the video. David's mother, my ex-mother-in-law, called me after seeing it. It was a short conversation but full of meaning. "I don't know what to tell you," she said, her voice breaking. "What he did is unforgivable. I just want you to know that we're not going to support him. There I knew that David had no way out. Because if his own family was leaving him behind, it meant he no longer had anywhere to run. Update 3. 6 months have passed since my world collapsed. 6 months since I returned from my trip to find my house empty, my bank account looted, and my dignity trampled by two of the people who should have protected me the most. 6 months since my mother and my husband decided to betray me in the vilest way possible. But what they didn't calculate was my resilience. They didn't expect me to rise from the ashes and turn their victory into their worst nightmare. They wanted to see me broken, devastated, not knowing what to do with my life. But instead it was I who ripped everything away from them, piece by piece until they had nothing left. The last time I wrote here, David and my mother were on the verge of ruin, evicted from the house they rented with my credit, without friends, without family support, and with their reputations in tatters after I leaked their video where my mother humiliated him in public. By that point their relationship was broken, full of resentment and constant fights. It wasn't hard to predict what would come next. David, who had thought he would find a comfortable and carefree life with my mother, ended up being little more than a nuisance to her. He was never an independent man. He always had a job because I secured it for him. My mother, on the other hand, never intended to support a man. She only thought that David would be her ticket out, a way to continue sustaining her effortless life. But when she saw that he was as ruined as she was, she quickly lost interest. The breakup between them was violent. I found out through my sister, who still received occasional information from acquaintances, that David and my mother had such a strong fight in the motel where they were staying that the administration kicked them out. Imagine how low they had fallen for even a place that receives all kinds of people to consider them too problematic to stay. I don't know exactly what they said to each other, but in the end, David ended up with all his belongings in a worn suitcase, standing on the street without a penny in his pocket and nowhere to go. He tried to contact his family. They rejected him. He tried to stay with friends. None wanted to help him. For them, he was a traitor and a parasite. Someone who had burned his last bridges with the only person who offered him stability. His last option was me. This man's nerve had no limits. He wrote me an email in which, with an almost miserable tone, he tried to paint himself as the victim. He told me that he had made a terrible mistake, that my mother had manipulated him, that he was just confused and that he had realized too late what I was really worth. He told me that he missed me, that he still loved me, that he would do anything to have another chance. He even had the audacity to tell me that he still saw our future together. I can't explain the exact feeling I had when I read that email. It was a combination of disgust, laughter, and an indescribable satisfaction. This was the same man who had stolen everything from me. The same man who without hesitation had run off with my mother as if I had never existed. Now he was begging me for a chance, as if I could still feel something for him beyond pure contempt. I didn't answer him. I just blocked him and let him drown in his own misery. My mother, on the other hand, tried to return to our lives with her usual tactic, playing the victim. First, she tried to contact me with a new number. She sent me a message that said, "I'm your mother. You can't treat me like this. We'll always be family." I deleted it without even hesitating. Then she tried with my sister, but she, who was already completely fed up with her manipulations, slammed the door in her face when she showed up at her house demanding that we let her back into our lives. Her financial situation became increasingly precarious. I learned that she tried to get help from some old friends but most ignored her. Her reputation was ruined. The image she had built for years as a strong, respected, independent woman had been shattered. Now she was just a traitor without a penny in her pocket, rejected by her own daughters, and despised by the people she once considered her friends. I, on the other hand, had never been better. A few weeks after leaving David and my mother in misery, my job offered me a promotion. It was a surprise because even though I had always worked hard, I didn't expect it to come so quickly. But when my boss called me into his office and told me that he had noticed my performance in recent months, and they wanted to give me more responsibilities with a better salary, I knew that this was just another sign that my life was moving forward while they were sinking. With the money I recovered in my new salary, I decided to treat myself. I sold the house I lived in with David, that house that was once a home, and that he turned into a place full of bitter memories. I bought an apartment in a completely new area with spacious rooms, natural light, and most importantly, no traces of my old life with him. I also opened myself up to meeting new people again. It wasn't that I was looking for someone in particular, but when I eliminated David from my life, I realized that the relationship I had with him had limited me. I was always worried about making him happy, about solving his problems, about being the perfect wife. Now, for the first time in a long time, I was worrying only about myself. One night at a dinner with friends, I met someone. I won't go into details yet because it's too early to say if this will be something serious. But what I can say is that after a long time, I feel excited again. I feel alive. David and my mother thought they could do this to me and move on with their lives. But in the end, it was I who moved on while they were trapped in the disaster they themselves created. I don't feel sorry for them. I don't feel remorse. Only satisfaction. Update 4. A year has passed since my life changed completely. A year since my mother and husband decided to betray me in the cruelest and most cowardly way possible. A year since I found my house empty, my account looted, and my dignity trampled. And more importantly, a year since I decided that I wasn't going to stay crying, but instead become their worst nightmare. Time has been generous to me. My promotion at work allowed me to consolidate myself financially. I left behind the house I once shared with David and moved to a modern, spacious apartment without any memories of my old life. I started dating someone, although I'm not in a hurry to define exactly what I want. I don't need to rush. For the first time in a long time, my happiness doesn't depend on anyone but myself. David and my mother, on the other hand, did not have the same luck. After being kicked out of the motel where he was staying, David tried to rebuild his life, but every door he knocked on was closed to him. His credit history was ruined, his social reputation destroyed, and his family had completely disinherited him. Without a stable job and without contacts who wanted to help him, he spent months jumping from couch to couch, depending on the charity of acquaintances who eventually got tired of him. The last thing I heard about him was that he ended up working in a fast food restaurant, something he probably would never have considered in his previous life. My mother, for her part, did not fare any better. Her financial situation continued to deteriorate to the point that she lost her car and most of her belongings to pay off debts. With her reputation in shambles, the same people she used to look down on and treat with superiority now looked at her with contempt. The friendships that once surrounded her had disappeared. And with her daughters turning their backs on her, she was completely alone. But my revenge was not yet complete. The final blow was missing, the one that would ensure that neither my mother nor David could ever get up again. When David stole the money from our joint account, he committed a crime. It wasn't just a simple act of betrayal. Legally, it was considered fraud. Although I initially decided to freeze the account and recover what I could, my lawyer advised me to officially report him. For months, the complaint progressed slowly but surely, gathering evidence of all the illegal transactions he made without my consent. And then came the call I had been waiting for. David was being officially sued. It wasn't just about me, but also about the fact that he was being investigated for financial fraud. The amount of money he had moved without authorization was enough for him to face real legal consequences. It didn't matter that he was now ruined. It didn't matter that he didn't have a stable job or enough income to pay a decent lawyer. The law showed him no mercy. When he received the legal notification, he tried to do what he always did. Manipulate, beg, find an easy way out. He looked for me once again, this time through a third party, sending me a message saying that if I ever loved him, I should help him. I can't explain the satisfaction I felt when I answered with a single word. No. David sank alone. He lost the trial because he had no evidence to defend himself. Now he has an official debt with me, one that he will never be able to fully pay because he doesn't even have enough to support himself. The blow to my mother came shortly after. For years, she had accumulated debts under my name without my knowledge, taking advantage of my trust and documents I had signed without reading at the time. Since I now had an incredible lawyer on my side, I decided to thoroughly review everything she had done and discovered that she had opened several credit accounts using my information. If David had committed fraud, she was no less guilty. I filed another complaint, and although she wasn't arrested, her financial history was completely destroyed. She couldn't open accounts again, she couldn't ask for loans, she couldn't do absolutely anything without her history of debt, and fraud appearing like a huge red sign on every attempt. It was at that moment that she understood what she had done. She tried to contact me once more with a pathetic message in which she said that we were family, that a mother never stops loving her daughter, that I should forgive her because blood is thicker than water. My response was simple. I sent her a copy of her ruined credit history and a copy of the complaint I filed against her. There were no more messages after that. Now David is in debt up to his neck, without a stable job, and with a permanent mark on his record that will haunt him for years. My mother has been completely isolated, without friends, without resources, without anyone to help her. And me? Well, I continue to enjoy my life, moving forward, growing, while they drown in the misery they themselves created. I would like to say that I feel sorry for them, but that would be a lie. I don't regret anything I did. If they had left me alone, maybe I would have been less ruthless, but they decided to take everything from me without a shred of remorse. So I simply returned the favor. This story ends here, with them destroyed and me stronger than ever. Because if there's something I learned in this process, it's that revenge is a dish best served when you prepare it with patience, intelligence, and without mercy. Final update. My mom is pregnant, and the father is David. I didn't think I would write here again. After the last year of watching my ex-husband and my mother fall to the bottom, of recovering my life and emerging stronger from all of this, I thought my story had come to an end. But there are things that even the most meticulous revenge cannot foresee. Twists so absurd and twisted that they would make anyone think this is a work of fiction and not the harsh reality. My mom is pregnant, and the father is David. I don't know how to explain the level of disgust, disbelief, and repulsion I felt when I received the news. It wasn't because they told me. Obviously, I have no contact with either of them, and if everything had gone as planned, I would never have heard from them again. But life is twisted. And it seems that sometimes it insists on reminding me that other people's misery has no limits. I found out about this thanks to my sister, who, despite having cut all ties with our mother, still has acquaintances in common who pass on information to her from time to time. One of these people contacted her a few weeks ago, unsure whether or not to tell her what they had discovered. David and my mother are not only still in contact, but they have been living together again in ruin, in a small room rented by the hour in a seedy neighborhood. It seemed that after everything that happened, they had no other option but to depend on each other. My mother, having no money or access to credit, was completely stuck, and David, with his ruined record, had nowhere else to go. And in the midst of that disaster, the unthinkable happened. Apparently, my mother had started to feel sick in recent months. At first, she attributed it to stress, lack of food, constant problems with David. But when the dizziness became more frequent and the vomiting started to be daily, she decided to go to a public health center. There they confirmed what no one in their right mind would have imagined. She was 3 months pregnant. When my sister told me, I thought it was a joke. I laughed because there was no other way to react. But when I saw her serious expression and she showed me the messages she had been sent, I understood that this was real. The image of my mother, over 50 years old, pregnant by my ex-husband, a man who had lost everything, who had been despised by his family, with no money, no future. It simply didn't make sense. It was the height of the grotesque. After the news leaked among the few acquaintances they still had, it didn't take long before it exploded like a bomb. The shame they already carried was multiplied 1,000 times because this was no longer just a story of betrayal and ruin. It was a joke, a scandal, something worthy of a cheap TV show. David apparently panicked. He didn't even have enough to support himself, much less a child. And my mother, with her financial history and lack of resources, had no options either. They tried to look for help, but by this point, no one wanted anything to do with them. David tried to contact his mother again, but she, with what little pride she had left, made it clear that she no longer considered him her son. My mother did the unthinkable. She tried to sue me. Yes, she tried to sue me for family abandonment, arguing that as a daughter, I had the obligation to help her financially because she was now in a vulnerable situation. When my lawyer informed me of this, my only reaction was to burst out laughing. My mother, the same one who betrayed me, who destroyed my marriage, who ran away with my husband and tried to leave me with nothing, now expected me to help her just because she was pregnant by my ex-husband. Of course, the lawsuit went nowhere. The law doesn't protect traitors. And if there was something I made sure of, It's that justice would be served, even if it came in the most unexpected and ironic way. She wanted to destroy my life, but she ended up destroying her own. I don't know what will happen to them. I don't care. What I do know is that they will never find peace, that they will be trapped in the hell they themselves created. I, on the other hand, am living the best stage of my life. I'm in a job that makes me feel fulfilled, surrounded by people who truly love me, without unnecessary burdens, and without the emotional chains that used to bind me to people who never deserved my love. In the end, what they did didn't destroy me, it strengthened me. And the biggest irony of all this is that while I move forward, they are condemned to sink further and further into the disaster they themselves caused. So how does this story end? With them locked in their own misery, with no one to help them, with no escape, and with me happier than ever, watching the chaos from afar with nothing more than a smile on my lips, and the satisfaction of having won this war.